The concert hall was silent, but not the kind of silence that comes before applause. This was the silence of doubt. The silence of 1,000 people holding their breath, wondering if what they were about to witness was real or just an elaborate spectacle. On stage, under the unforgiving glare of spotlights, sat a man before a 9-foot Steinway grand piano. His name was Elijah Brooks, and in just moments he would do something that most people in that room believed was impossible. Because Elijah Brooks couldn't hear a single note he was about to play. The Chicago Symphony Center had never been so packed, and yet so quiet. Every seat was filled. People stood in the aisles. Camera phones were already raised, ready to capture either a miracle or a disaster. The city's most respected music critics sat in the front rows, notebooks, open pens, poised skepticism etched across their faces. One critic had written just days before, "Piano is an auditory art. Without hearing, there is no music. What we're about to witness is not artistry, it's a gimmick." But Elijah didn't read that review. He couldn't hear the whispers rippling through the crowd. He couldn't hear the doubt. All he could feel was the smooth, cool surface of the ivory keys beneath his fingertips, and the vibration of his own heartbeat pounding through his chest. His mother sat in the third row, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. His younger sister, a violinist herself, sat beside her, tears already forming before a single note had been played. They knew what this moment meant. They knew what Elijah had sacrificed to get here. 7 years. 7 years of silence. 7 years of learning a language that no one else could speak. 7 years of being told he was chasing an impossible dream. And now here he was. Elijah's fingers hovered over the keys. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Even the skeptics leaned forward, unable to look away. And then his fingers descended. The first note rang out into the silence, pure and clear and perfect. And in that moment, everything changed. But to understand how Elijah Brooks arrived at this moment, to understand how a man who lived in complete silence could create something so beautiful that it would move thousands to tears, we have to go back. Back to before the silence. Back to when Elijah's world was full of sound. Back to the night that took it all away. 7 years earlier, Elijah Brooks lived in a world of sound. Not just any sound, but every sound. Every frequency, every tone, every subtle harmonic that most people never noticed. Because sound wasn't just Elijah's passion, it was his profession, his art, his entire existence. As a sound engineer in Chicago, Elijah spent his days shaping audio the way a sculptor shapes clay. He worked with some of the city's top recording studios, fine-tuning vocals for Grammy-nominated artists, balancing orchestral arrangements, creating sonic landscapes that people felt in their bones. His ears were so finely tuned that he could identify a microphone model just by listening to its signature sound. He could hear a mix and know instantly whether the bass was compressed at 3:1 or 4:1. Elijah doesn't just hear music, his colleague once said. He lives inside it. But music wasn't just his career. It was his heritage. Elijah grew up in the south side of Chicago, in a small apartment that was always filled with music. His mother, Dorothy Brooks, had been a gospel singer in her youth, her voice so powerful it could shake the walls of the Baptist church on Sunday mornings. Though she'd given up performing after Elijah was born, she never gave up singing. The apartment was always alive with her voice humming while she cooked, singing while she cleaned, harmonizing with the radio. His younger sister Maya had inherited their mother's musical gift, but channeled it through the violin. By the time she was 16, she was playing with the Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra, her bow dancing across the strings with a precision that made audiences weep. And Elijah had found his calling behind the mixing board, crafting the perfect sound, the perfect moment, the perfect emotional experience. Music wasn't just in the Brooks family, it was the Brooks family. Every Sunday they would gather in the living room. Dorothy would sing, Maya would play her violin, and Elijah would sit at his old keyboard, the one his mother had saved for 2 years to buy him, and they would make music together. Imperfect, unrehearsed, beautiful music. This right here, Dorothy would say, her eyes shining. This is what life is about. This is what matters. Elijah believed her. On the night of October 14th, Elijah was driving home from a late session at the studio. It was past midnight and rain was hammering against the windshield so hard the wipers could barely keep up. He'd been working on a jazz album, spending 14 hours trying to capture the perfect ambience in a piano recording. He was exhausted but satisfied. The track was perfect. He could hear it in his head, every note exactly where it needed to be. The roads were slick. Visibility was almost zero. But Elijah had driven this route 1,000 times. He knew every turn, every stoplight, every pothole. He never saw the other car. It ran the red light at the intersection of State and Monroe, hydroplaning on the wet asphalt, completely out of control. Elijah had maybe half a second to register the headlights cutting through the rain before the impact. The sound of the collision was deafening. Metal screaming against metal. Glass shattering into 1,000 pieces. The sickening crunch of cars folding in on themselves. And then for Elijah, there was nothing. He woke up 3 days later in Northwestern Memorial Hospital, tubes running from his arms, machines beeping around him, his head wrapped in bandages so thick he could barely move. His mother was sitting beside the bed, her eyes red from crying. When she saw him open his eyes, she grabbed his hand and started speaking, her mouth moving rapidly, tears streaming down her face. But Elijah couldn't hear her. He saw her lips moving. He saw the joy and relief on her face. But there was no sound. Nothing. His mother was crying. He could see that. But he couldn't hear her tears. A doctor rushed in, and Elijah could see his mouth moving too, explaining something, gesturing to charts and screens. But it was all silent. Like watching a movie with the volume turned all the way down. Panic seized Elijah's chest. He tried to speak, but his own voice sounded strange, disconnected, like it was coming from somewhere else. He couldn't hear himself. He couldn't hear anything. The diagnosis came later that day, delivered by a specialist who spoke slowly and clearly, making sure Elijah could read his lips: severe traumatic brain injury, affecting both auditory nerves. The damage was catastrophic and irreversible. Complete bilateral sensorineural hearing loss. The technical term for what most people simply call deaf. Elijah would never hear another sound for the rest of his life. Not his mother's voice, not his sister's violin, not the music he had spent his entire life creating and loving and living for. Gone. All of it. In one rainy night. In one moment of terrible luck. The silence that followed wasn't just the absence of sound. It was the absence of everything Elijah had ever been. He was 32 years old, and his life as he knew it was over. The first year and a half after the accident, Elijah Brooks didn't live. He existed. There's a difference. Living requires purpose, requires connection, requires the belief that tomorrow might be better than today. Elijah had none of those things. What he had was silence. Endless, suffocating, absolute silence. The apartment he moved into after leaving the hospital was small and dark. He chose it specifically because it was far from his old neighborhood, far from the studio where he used to work, far from anything that reminded him of who he used to be. The landlord tried to make conversation when Elijah signed the lease, but Elijah just pointed to his ears and shook his head. The landlord, uncomfortable, simply handed over the keys. Elijah spent most of his days sitting in that apartment, staring at walls. His mother called constantly. He could see her name lighting up his phone over and over. She would text him paragraphs, begging him to come home to have dinner, to just talk. Maya sent videos of herself playing violin messages, saying she missed him, that the family needed him. Elijah responded to none of them. What would he say? How could he explain that the person they missed didn't exist anymore? That Elijah Brooks, the sound engineer, the music lover, the man who lived inside melodies and harmonies, had died in that car crash just as surely as if his heart had stopped beating. The person who survived was just a shell. A broken, silent shell. He stopped going outside unless absolutely necessary. Groceries were delivered. Bills were paid automatically. The world continued spinning, and Elijah sat in his dark apartment, drowning in silence. People don't understand what silence really is until they've lived in it. It's not peaceful. It's not calm. It's a void that swallows everything. In silence, you can't escape your own thoughts. There's no music to drown out the pain, no ambient noise to remind you that the world is still moving. Just you and your thoughts and the deafening nothing. Elijah thought about ending it, more than once. On the worst nights, he would sit on his bed and imagine how easy it would be, how much simpler it would be to just stop fighting, stop pretending that life without sound was worth living. He never went through with it, but the thoughts were there, persistent and dark and seductive. What stopped him wasn't hope. It wasn't faith. It was something much simpler. He was too tired to even make that final decision. So he just kept existing day after day in his silent prison. His former colleagues from the studio tried to reach out at first. Cards, messages, invitations to lunch. But Elijah ignored them all. What would they talk about? The latest album they were working on, the new microphone technique they'd discovered. All of it was a language Elijah no longer spoke, a world he no longer belonged to. Slowly, the messages stopped coming. People moved on. Life moved on. Elijah stayed still. 18 months after the accident, on a random Tuesday in April, Maya showed up at his apartment unannounced. Elijah heard the knock, not with his ears, but through the vibration in the floor. He considered not answering. But Maya was persistent. She knocked again, and again. And when Elijah finally opened the door, she was standing there with a keyboard under her arm. Not an expensive one, just a small, cheap, battery-powered keyboard, the kind you might buy for a child. She pushed past him into the apartment, set the keyboard on his coffee table, and turned to face him. Her lips moved, and even though Elijah couldn't hear the words, he could read them clearly. "You don't get to give up." Then she left. Elijah stared at the keyboard for 3 days. It sat on his coffee table like an accusation, like a challenge, like a reminder of everything he'd lost. He wanted to throw it away. He wanted to smash it against the wall. He wanted to scream at Maya for bringing this torture into his home. But he didn't. On the 4th day, he turned it on. He didn't know why. Maybe curiosity. Maybe boredom. Maybe some tiny dying ember of who he used to be, trying one last time to flicker. He pressed a key. He couldn't hear it. But something happened. Something he didn't expect. He felt it. The vibration traveled from the keyboard, through the coffee table, through the floor, up into his body. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a tiny tremor. A ripple in the silence. Elijah pressed another key, a different vibration, different frequency. Still there. He pressed another, and another. And for the first time in 18 months, Elijah Brooks felt something other than despair. He felt curiosity. It was the smallest spark, the tiniest flicker of light in an ocean of darkness. But it was something. And in that moment, that tiny spark was enough. Elijah pulled the keyboard closer and placed his hands on the keys. He began to press them randomly, not trying to make music, just trying to feel. Each key had a slightly different vibration. The lower notes rumbled deeper. The higher notes tickled lighter. He couldn't hear them, but he could feel them. And in that feeling, something shifted. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was possibility. The possibility that maybe, just maybe, music wasn't completely lost to him. That maybe there was another way, a way that no one had shown him, a way he would have to discover himself. Elijah sat at that cheap little keyboard for 6 hours straight that night, pressing keys, feeling vibrations, mapping out in his mind what each note felt like. He didn't sleep. He didn't eat. He just played, if you could call it playing, and felt. When the sun came up the next morning, streaming through his dusty windows, Elijah looked down at his hands on the keyboard and realized something profound. Music wasn't just something you heard. It was something you felt. And if he could feel it, maybe, just maybe, he could learn to create it again. It was the first time in 18 months that Elijah had thought about the future with anything other than dread. The keyboard Maya brought became Elijah's entire world. But feeling random vibrations wasn't the same as making music. Elijah knew that. What he needed was structure, technique, understanding. He needed to learn a language that, as far as he knew, no one had ever truly mastered. He needed to learn how to translate feeling into music. The first thing Elijah did was research. He spent weeks reading everything he could find about deaf musicians. He learned about Evelyn Glennie, the Scottish percussionist who had been profoundly deaf since age 12 and became one of the world's greatest musicians. He read about how she felt music through her bare feet, how she could distinguish pitches by where in her body she felt the vibrations. He discovered that Beethoven had composed some of his greatest works after losing his hearing using a rod attached to his piano that he would bite down on, feeling the vibrations through his skull. These weren't just stories. They were proof. Proof that what Elijah was attempting wasn't impossible. Difficult, yes. Unprecedented in his specific situation, perhaps. But not impossible. If they could do it, maybe he could too. Elijah started developing his own techniques. He took the small keyboard and placed it on the floor of his apartment. He removed his shoes and socks and stood on the wooden floorboards, pressing keys with his hands and feeling the vibrations travel through the floor and into his feet. Different notes created different patterns of vibration. The bass notes, C, D, E, in the lower octaves, created deep, rolling waves that he felt in his heels and calves. The treble notes, G, A, B, in the higher octaves, created sharper, quicker pulses that tickled the balls of his feet. He bought a small speaker and placed it face down on the floor, connected to his keyboard. When he played, the speaker would pulse against the wood, amplifying the vibrations, making them stronger, more distinct. He would sit cross-legged on the floor, his hands on the keys, his bare feet pressed against the floor near the speaker, and he would play for hours, teaching his body to recognize what his ears no longer could. It was exhausting, frustrating. There were days when he wanted to give up, when the whole endeavor seemed absurd. What was he doing? Trying to become a pianist when he couldn't hear? Who was he kidding? But something kept him going. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the memory of who he used to be. Or maybe it was simpler than that. For the first time since the accident, he had a purpose. And purpose, even a difficult one, was better than the void. After 3 months of practicing alone, Elijah realized he needed help. Real help. From someone who understood music at a level deeper than just hearing it. He found Mrs. Weber through a community center posting. She was a piano teacher, 73 years old, originally from Munich, Germany, who had been teaching in Chicago for over 40 years. Her posting mentioned that she specialized in non-traditional students and alternative learning methods. Elijah sent her an email. He explained his situation, the accident, the deafness, his attempt to learn piano through vibration. He expected her to politely decline or suggest he try a different hobby. Instead, she wrote back within an hour. "Come to my studio tomorrow at 2 p.m. We'll see what's possible." Mrs. Weber's studio was in a converted warehouse in Pilsen, filled with 3 grand pianos, various keyboards and walls covered with sheet music and photographs of students. When Elijah arrived, Mrs. Weber was waiting, a tiny woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that seemed to see right through him. She spoke to him in clear, deliberate German-accented English, making sure he could read her lips. "Show me what you can do." Elijah sat at one of the grands, a beautiful Yamaha C7. He placed his hands on the keys and played what he had been practicing, a simple C major scale, up and down, feeling for each note, trying to keep the timing even by counting vibrations in his head. It was clumsy, amateur, full of mistakes. When he finished, he looked up at Mrs. Weber, expecting disappointment. Instead, she was smiling. "You feel the music," she said. "That is more than most of my students can say. They hear it, yes, but they don't feel it. You already understand something it takes others years to learn." She sat down beside him on the bench. "Music is not sound," she continued. "Sound is just the vehicle. Music is emotion, is intention, is story. You can tell a story without words. You can tell a story without sound. The question is, what story do you want to tell?" Over the next 2 years, Mrs. Weber became not just Elijah's teacher, but his guide into a world he never knew existed. She taught him that music had structure beyond what you could hear. It had visual patterns on the page. The sheet music wasn't just instructions for what notes to play, but a map of where the emotion lived. A sharp symbol meant tension. A flat symbol meant release. The curve of a phrase marking showed where the breath lived, where the human element existed. She taught him to count differently. Not with a metronome he couldn't hear, but with his heartbeat, with his breathing, with the natural rhythm of his own body. "Your body is a metronome," she would say. "Trust it." She taught him that every key on the piano had not just a different sound, but a different feeling. C was grounded, earthy, stable. F sharp was tense, yearning, reaching. E flat was warm, embracing, comforting. These weren't just frequencies, they were personalities, characters in the story he was learning to tell. Most importantly, she taught him that limitation wasn't the end of creativity. It was often the beginning. Beethoven's deafness didn't end his genius, she would remind him. It deepened it. He wrote music no one else could imagine because he wasn't constrained by what he thought music should sound like. He wrote what he felt music should be. The learning process was unlike anything Elijah had experienced before. Mrs. Weber would play a piece something by Chopin or Debussy or Bach, and Elijah would place his hands on the side of the piano, feeling the vibrations, learning to recognize patterns. Then she would have him try to recreate it, not by memory, but by feeling. She would correct his hand position, his pressure on the keys, the way he used the pedals, all through demonstration and touch, never through words alone. She taught him to watch other pianists, to study their body language, their facial expressions, the way their shoulders and back moved with the music. Music is a full-body experience, she explained. Watch how Lang Lang uses his entire body. Watch how Glenn Gould hummed while he played, not because he needed to hear it, but because the music lived in his whole being. Elijah practiced 6, 7, 8 hours a day. His fingers grew strong. Calluses formed on his fingertips. His sense of vibration became so acute that he could tell if he was hitting a key too hard or too soft just by the feedback he felt through his hands and feet. He learned Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata fitting he thought to learn from another deaf pianist. He learned it phrase by phrase, measure by measure, feeling for the emotional arc of each section. The first movement was meditation, contemplation, sadness held in check. The second movement was a brief respite, a moment of calm. The third movement was unleashed fury, passion, everything held back, finally breaking free. When he played it for Mrs. Weber after 6 months of practice, she wept. "You feel it," she said, wiping her eyes. "You really truly feel it. Not just the notes, the soul of it." But Elijah wanted more than to recreate what others had done. He wanted to create something new, something that was his. So, he started composing. It began with simple melodies, just a few notes strung together, feelings translated into patterns of vibration. He would sit at the piano late at night when the city had quieted down, and he would play, searching for something. He didn't know what. A voice, maybe? His voice in this new language he was learning. One night, about a year and a half into his training with Mrs. Weber, Elijah was playing around with a chord progression. Nothing complicated. Just some minor chords moving in a pattern that felt like walking forward into fog, uncertain but persistent. And then something happened. His hands found something, a melody that he hadn't planned, hadn't practiced. It just emerged, flowing from his fingers like water finding its path. It was melancholic, but hopeful. Sad, but beautiful. It felt like everything he had experienced since the accident. The loss, the pain, the slow climb back toward light. He played it over and over, refining it, adding to it, building it into something larger. Bass notes that rumbled like thunder. High notes that sparkled like rain. Middle voices that wove through like memory. When he finally stopped, his fingers aching, his shoulders tired, he sat back and realized he had just composed his first original piece. He called it Silent Thunder. When he played it for Mrs. Weber the following week, she listened, felt the entire piece without interruption. When he finished, she stood up from her chair and walked to the window, looking out at the Chicago skyline. That she finally said, turning back to him, is not the work of a man learning to cope with disability. That is the work of an artist who has found his voice, a unique voice, a voice that speaks in a language only you can speak. She paused, then added, "You're ready, ready for what Elijah asked, though he could read the answer in her eyes. Ready to share this with the world," she said. Ready to show them that music doesn't live in the ears. It lives in the soul. And you, Elijah Brooks, have more soul in one measure of your music than most pianists have in their entire repertoire. Elijah wanted to believe her, But sharing his music with the world meant facing the one thing he had been avoiding for nearly 3 years: other people's judgment, other people's skepticism, other people's doubt. He wasn't sure he was ready for that. But Mrs. Weber was, and she had already made up her mind. Mrs. Weber didn't ask Elijah's permission. She simply told him, "You're performing at the community showcase next month." Elijah's stomach dropped. The community showcase was a small event held at a local arts center in Pilsen, where Mrs. Weber's students performed for friends and family. Nothing fancy. No critics. No pressure. Just supportive people listening to amateur musicians do their best. But for Elijah, it might as well have been Carnegie Hall. "I'm not ready," he protested. "You're more ready than you think," Mrs. Weber countered. "And you'll never be ready if you wait for ready to feel comfortable. Ready feels terrifying. That's how you know it's the right time." The showcase came faster than Elijah wanted. One day, he was practicing in the safety of Mrs. Weber's studio, and the next, he was standing backstage at the Arts Center, watching other students perform, his heart pounding so hard, he could feel it in his throat. There were maybe 70 people in the audience. Families, mostly, a few friends, nothing intimidating. And yet Elijah felt like he might pass out. What if he messed up? What if he lost count of the vibrations and the timing fell apart? What if people looked at him with pity instead of appreciation? What if they saw him as a disabled man trying to do something he had no business doing instead of as a musician? Mrs. Weber appeared beside him. She placed a hand on his shoulder and looked him in the eyes. "Remember," she said clearly so he could read every word, "you are not playing for their approval. You are playing because the music inside you demands to be born. Everything else is just noise." The irony of the word noise wasn't lost on either of them. She smiled. When his name was called, Elijah walked onto the small stage, sat at the upright piano, and placed his hands on the keys. He had decided to play Silent Thunder, his own composition. If he was going to do this, he was going to do it with truth. He began to play. The first few measures were shaky. He could feel his hands trembling, could feel the audience watching him. But then something happened. The music took over. The melody he had discovered in his late-night practice sessions emerged again, and Elijah stopped thinking about the audience, stopped thinking about being deaf, stopped thinking about anything except the story his hands were telling. When he finished, there was a moment of silence. Not the silence of doubt, but the silence of people processing what they had just experienced. Then the applause came. Not polite, obligatory applause. Real applause. People standing, some with tears in their eyes. Mrs. Weber was right. He was ready. But the community showcase was just the beginning. It was safe, supportive. People there wanted him to succeed. The real world, Elijah would soon discover, was much less kind. Word spread about the deaf pianist in Pilsen. First, through social media, someone had recorded his performance and posted it online. Then through local news. A human interest story: man who lost hearing learns to play piano. The video got attention. Thousands of views. Tens of thousands. Then hundreds of thousands. And with attention came opportunity and criticism. A local jazz club owner reached out offering Elijah a spot to perform at an open mic night. Elijah accepted. The performance went well. The crowd was supportive, curious, moved by his story. But when a recording of that performance spread further, reaching the broader Chicago music community, the response was different. On music forums and social media, people began to debate. Was this really music? Or was it just an impressive parlor trick? Could someone who couldn't hear possibly understand musicality, phrasing, dynamics, all the subtle elements that made music more than just hitting the right notes. One music blogger wrote, "There's no question that Elijah Brooks's story is inspiring. But inspiration doesn't equal artistry. Playing piano requires auditory feedback, the ability to hear what you're creating and adjust in real time. Without that, you're just going through motions, however impressively." A jazz musician commented, "I respect the effort, but let's be real. Music is fundamentally an auditory experience. A deaf person playing piano is like a blind person painting. Sure, they can go through the motions, but they're missing the essential component of the art form." The comments cut deeper than Elijah wanted to admit. He tried to ignore them. Mrs. Weber advised him to focus on the music, not the noise, literal or figurative, but the doubts seeped in. Late at night, alone in his apartment, Elijah would wonder, were they right? Was he just fooling himself? Was his music real, or was it just him going through motions, creating something that sounded good to others, but that he could never truly evaluate himself? The self-doubt might have consumed him, if not for what happened next. A prominent Chicago music critic, Gerald Steinberg, wrote a scathing article in the Chicago Tribune titled "The Limits of Inspiration: Why Deaf Musicians Can't Master Piano." In it, Steinberg argued that while Elijah's story was moving true, musical mastery required the full sensory experience. He wrote, "Brooks may be able to hit the right notes in the right order, but music is more than a mechanical process. It requires listening, adjusting, feeling the resonance of the room, hearing the harmonics. These are things that cannot be replicated through vibration alone. What Brooks is doing is admirable as therapy, but it shouldn't be confused with professional musicianship." The article went viral. Debates raged on social media. Some people defended Elijah passionately. Others agreed with Steinberg. The disability community was outraged. The classical music community was divided. And Elijah sat in his apartment, reading the article over and over, feeling his dream slipping away. His mother called, furious. Maya texted him paragraphs defending him. Mrs. Weber showed up at his apartment with a bottle of wine and a determination to talk him out of giving up. "Let me tell you something about critics," Mrs. Weber said, sitting across from him at his small kitchen table. "Critics don't create. They consume and judge. It's easy to tear down what you've never attempted to build." "But what if he's right?" Elijah asked. "What if I'm just pretending, Mrs.?" Weber set down her wine glass with enough force to make the table vibrate intentionally. Elijah suspected. "You are not pretending," she said firmly. "You are creating real music. Music that moves people. I've been teaching for 46 years. I know the difference between technique and artistry. You have both." "But I can't hear Beethoven," couldn't hear Mrs. Weber interrupted. "Evelyn Glennie can't hear. Do you think their music is less real? Less valid?" "Music doesn't live in the ears. Elijah, how many times must I tell you this? It lives in the heart, in the body, in the intention. You feel music more deeply than most hearing people ever will." Elijah wanted to believe her, but the doubts persisted. Then something unexpected happened. The article and the subsequent controversy caught the attention of the management at Chicago Symphony Center. Not because they wanted to condemn Elijah, but because they saw an opportunity. They reached out with an offer. Would Elijah be interested in performing a solo recital at Symphony Center a full evening? His own concert. A chance to prove once and for all that his music was real. It was the opportunity of a lifetime. It was also terrifying. Symphony Center was one of the most prestigious venues in the country, the home of the Chicago Symphony Orchestra, the stage where the world's greatest pianists performed. and they were offering it to him, a self-taught deaf pianist who had been playing for only 2.5 years. When Elijah told Mrs. Weber about the offer, she didn't hesitate. "You accept," she said. "You accept, and you prove every single one of them wrong. Not with words, with music." "What if I fail?" Elijah asked. "Then you fail with courage," Mrs. Weber replied. "But I don't think you will. I think you're going to show them something they've never seen before, something they didn't know was possible." Elijah knew she was right. This was his chance. His moment to answer the critics, to silence the doubts, his own and everyone else's. But accepting the offer was the easy part. Now he had to actually do it. He had 3 months to prepare for the most important performance of his life. 3 months to choose the perfect program. 3 months to practice until his hands bled. 3 months to mentally prepare for stepping onto one of the most famous stages in the world and proving that a deaf man could create something beautiful. 3 months to prepare for the night that would either validate everything he'd worked for or confirm everyone's worst suspicions. The night that would change everything. 3 months sounds like a lot of time until you're using it to prepare for the most important night of your life. Elijah threw himself into preparation with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He practiced 8, 10, sometimes 12 hours a day. His world narrowed to just the piano, the vibrations, the music he needed to perfect. Mrs. Weber helped him design the program for the evening. It needed to be strategic, showcasing not just technical ability, but emotional depth-range storytelling. They decided on a 3-part program. First, he would open with Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, a nod to the deaf composer who had paved the way, and a piece Elijah knew intimately. It was familiar territory, something to settle his nerves and establish credibility. Second, he would play Debussy's Clair de Lune, a piece that was all about subtlety, nuance, the ability to create atmosphere and emotion through delicate touch. It would prove he wasn't just mechanically hitting notes, but truly shaping music. And finally, he would conclude with his own composition. Silent Thunder expanded and refined into a full 15-minute piece. This was the risk, the gamble. Playing his own work meant there was no benchmark to compare against, no correct version that people could say he failed to match. It would be pure artistry, pure Elijah, with nothing to hide behind. The program was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. But Mrs. Weber insisted, if you're going to do this, do it fully. Show them everything you are. The training was brutal. Elijah practiced each piece hundreds of times, feeling for every tiny variation in vibration, every subtle shift in dynamics. He worked with Mrs. Weber on phrasing, on the emotional arc of each piece, on making sure that the music told a story that transcended sound. He practiced on different pianos to learn how each instrument responded differently. Some had heavier keys that required more pressure. Some had lighter actions that were more sensitive to touch. He needed to be prepared for whatever Chicago Symphony Center would provide. But the physical preparation was only half the battle. The mental challenge was far worse. Late at night, when he was alone in his apartment, the doubts would creep in. What if Gerald Steinberg was right? What if he was just fooling himself and everyone else? What if he walked out on that stage and forgot everything? Lost count of the vibrations, fell apart in front of thousands of people. What if the critics were right, and this whole thing was just a gimmick? Worse than the fear of failure was the fear of humiliation, of being pitied, of people clapping not because his music was good, but because they felt sorry for him. That was the nightmare that kept him awake, being reduced to a charity case, an inspirational story instead of an artist. 6 weeks before the concert, Elijah had a breakdown. He was practicing silent thunder, working on a particularly difficult passage, when his hands suddenly froze on the keys. The vibration stopped meaning anything. The patterns he had memorized dissolved. He couldn't feel the music anymore, just noise, just chaos. He slammed his hands down on the keyboard in frustration, creating a discordant crash of notes he couldn't hear, but could feel jarring through his bones. And then he broke down crying. All the pressure, all the fear, all the doubt came pouring out. He sat at the piano and sobbed, his shoulders shaking, unable to stop. What was he doing? Who did he think he was? He wasn't a real pianist. He was a sound engineer who had lost everything and was desperately trying to reclaim something that was gone forever. He called Mrs. Weber. It was 2 a.m, but she answered on the 3rd ring. Through his tears, through his broken attempts to speak, he told her everything. That he couldn't do this. That he was going to cancel. That he was sorry for wasting her time, for embarrassing himself and her and everyone who had believed in him. Mrs. Weber listened to all of it without interrupting. And when he finally finished exhausted and empty, she said, "Just one thing, come to my studio, right now, I'll be waiting." Elijah drove through the empty Chicago streets at 2:30 in the morning, parked outside Mrs. Weber's warehouse studio, and found her sitting at the Yamaha Grand, a single lamp illuminating the piano. She gestured for him to sit beside her on the bench. "Do you know why I agreed to teach you?" she asked. Elijah shook his head. "Because when you played for me that first day with all your mistakes and uncertainty, I felt something I haven't felt in years of teaching. I felt truth, raw, unfiltered, honest truth. You weren't trying to impress me. You weren't trying to prove anything. You were just trying to feel the music. And that she tapped his chest right over his heart is where all real music comes from. Not the ears, not the technique. Here." She turned to the piano. "Let me tell you a story. When I was a young woman in Munich, I studied at the conservatory. I was talented, very talented, my teachers said. I could play anything. Liszt, Rachmaninoff, the most technically demanding pieces. I performed all over Europe. I was going to be a great concert pianist." She paused, her hands resting on the keys. "But I wasn't. Because I was playing with my head, not my heart. I was perfect, but I was cold. The music was correct, but it wasn't true. It took me 20 years to understand that technique without soul is just gymnastics. Pretty to watch, but ultimately empty." She looked at Elijah. "You don't have that problem. You can't hide behind technique. You can't rely on what you've heard before, on mimicking others. Everything you play has to come from inside you. And that makes your music more honest than 99% of pianists who can hear perfectly." "But the critics," Elijah started. "The critics are afraid," Mrs. Weber interrupted. "Afraid of what you represent. Because if you can create beautiful music without hearing it challenges everything they think they know about what music is and how it works, you make them uncomfortable. Good. Art should make people uncomfortable sometimes." She placed her hands on the keys. "Play with me," she said. And there, at 3 a.m. in an empty warehouse studio, Mrs. Weber and Elijah played together. She played the melody of silent thunder, while Elijah played the harmonies, feeling the vibrations merge and separate, creating something together that neither could create alone. When they finished, Elijah felt different. Calmer. Clearer. "You're ready," Mrs. Weber said. "You've been ready. The question is whether you're brave enough to show them." Elijah nodded. He was still scared, but he was ready. The final weeks of preparation passed in a blur. Tickets for the concert sold out within 48 hours, a mixture of classical music lovers, curious skeptics, disability rights advocates, and people who just wanted to witness something unprecedented. The pressure was immense. Media outlets were calling it the most controversial piano recital in decades. Online debates raged about whether Symphony Center should have offered him the platform. Some called it inspirational. Others called it a publicity stunt. Elijah tried to tune it all out. He focused on the music. Just the music. The night before the concert, his family came over to his apartment. His mother, Dorothy, cooked his favorite meal, her famous jambalaya with cornbread. Maya brought wine. They sat around his small kitchen table, not talking much, just being together. Before they left, Dorothy pulled Elijah aside. She took his hands in hers and spoke slowly, making sure he could read every word. "Your grandmother, my mother, she was blind from the time she was 40. You never met her. She passed before you were born. But she sang in the church choir for 30 years after she lost her sight. People used to ask her how she could sing without seeing the sheet music. And she would say, 'Baby, I don't need to see the music. I am the music.'" Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "You are the music, Elijah. Tomorrow night you show them that. Not for the critics, not for anyone else. For you. For everyone who was ever told they couldn't do something because of what they lacked. You show them what's possible." That night, Elijah barely slept. He lay in bed, feeling his heartbeat, counting the rhythm of his breathing, preparing his body to be his metronome, his guide, his instrument. Tomorrow, he would step onto the stage at Chicago Symphony Center. Tomorrow, he would prove that music wasn't about what you could hear. Tomorrow, everything would change. The day of the concert arrived with brilliant autumn sunshine that seemed almost cruel in its cheerfulness. Elijah woke up at 6 a.m., too anxious to sleep any longer. He went through his morning routine, mechanically shower, coffee, breakfast he barely tasted. He tried to practice but couldn't focus. His hands felt foreign, disconnected. Mrs. Weber had told him this would happen. "The day of performance, don't practice," she'd said. "Trust your preparation. Trust your body. It knows what to do." Elijah spent the morning walking through Chicago, trying to calm his racing thoughts. He walked past the lake, watching boats cut through the water. He walked through Millennium Park, past the Bean, past street musicians playing for tourists. He watched people going about their normal days, unaware that his entire life was about to be decided in a few hours. By 5 p.m., he was at Symphony Center. The building was magnificent, a historic landmark with soaring columns and ornate architecture. Elijah had been here before as a sound engineer working on recordings with the Chicago Symphony Orchestra. But walking in as a performer was entirely different. The weight of history pressed down on him with every step. A stage manager met him at the artist's entrance and led him backstage. The piano was already on stage, a 9-foot Steinway Model D, the same model used by the greatest pianists in the world. Elijah was given time to familiarize himself with the instrument before the audience arrived. He sat at the bench and placed his hands on the keys. The piano was perfectly maintained, the action responsive, but not too light. He played a few scales, feeling the vibrations through the bench, through the stage floor, learning this specific instrument's personality. It was perfect. Backstage, Elijah could feel the vibrations of the crowd arriving. The rumble of footsteps, the buzz of conversation transmitted through the building's structure. The hall was filling up, 2,500 seats, and every single one was sold. Mrs. Weber found him in the green room at 7:15 p.m., 45 minutes before showtime. She was dressed elegantly, her silver hair styled beautifully. She looked at him with such pride that Elijah almost started crying right then. "How do you feel?" she asked. "Terrified," Elijah admitted. "Good," she smiled. "That means you care. Now remember, you're not performing for them. You're sharing something with them. There's a difference. Performing is about their judgment. Sharing is about your truth. Share your truth tonight. She hugged him, something she rarely did, and whispered something he felt more than heard through the vibration of her voice against his chest. Make them listen with more than their ears. At 7:55 p.m., the stage manager came to get him. 5 minutes, Mr. Brooks. Elijah straightened his tuxedo, and followed the stage manager through the corridors to the wings of the stage. Through the gap in this curtain, he could see the audience. The hall was packed, every seat filled, people standing in the aisles. The atmosphere was electric anticipation mixed with skepticism, mixed with curiosity. In the third row, Elijah could see his mother and sister. Dorothy was clutching Maya's hand so tightly both their knuckles were white. In the front row, he spotted Gerald Steinberg, the critic who had written the scathing article. The man's face was unreadable pen poised over his notepad. The house lights dimmed, the audience quieted. This was it. The stage manager gave him a nod, and Elijah walked out onto the stage. The applause was immediate and thunderous. He couldn't hear it, but he could feel it. The vibration of thousands of hands clapping traveled through the stage, up through his feet, a physical wave of sound. Some people were standing already applauding his courage just for showing up. Elijah walked to the piano, gave a small bow to the audience, and sat down on the bench. He placed his hands on the keys and closed his eyes. For just a moment, Elijah allowed himself to remember. He remembered being a sound engineer, headphones on, lost in the details of a mix. He remembered his mother singing in the kitchen. He remembered Sunday afternoons making music with his family. He remembered the rain on the windshield, the headlights cutting through the darkness the moment before everything changed. He remembered 18 months of silence, of darkness, of wanting to give up. He remembered the cheap keyboard on his coffee table, the first vibration he felt. Mrs. Weber's smile, the slow, painful, beautiful process of learning a new language. He remembered why he was here. Then he opened his eyes, looked out at the audience one last time, and began to play. The first notes of Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata emerged from the piano, soft and haunting. The opening movement was all meditation, all contemplation. Elijah's hands moved across the keys with a gentleness that seemed impossible for someone who couldn't hear what he was creating. But this wasn't about hearing. This was about feeling. The melody floated through the hall, each note precisely placed, the dynamics swelling and receding like breathing. The audience sat in absolute stillness, afraid to move, afraid to break whatever spell was being woven. Elijah moved through the first movement with a sensitivity that surprised even himself. Every phrase was shaped with intention. Every pause held meaning. This wasn't just playing notes, this was telling a story. Beethoven's story, his own story, a story about finding light in darkness. The second movement came lighter, more hopeful. A brief respite before the storm, and then the third movement, the fury. Elijah's hands flew across the keyboard, the fast passages pouring out with an intensity that made people gasp. This was rage and pain, and everything held back, finally breaking free. His whole body moved with the music, shoulders swaying, head tilting, completely lost in the emotion of the piece. When the final chord crashed down, the silence that followed was absolute. Then the applause came, not just polite appreciation, but genuine awe. Elijah stood, bowed, and sat back down for the second piece. Debussy's Clair de Lune required a completely different approach. Where Beethoven was about power and drama, Debussy was about subtlety, about the spaces between the notes, about creating atmosphere. This was the piece that would truly test whether Elijah understood musicality or was just mechanically executing. He began. The opening phrases floated through the air like moonlight on water, delicate, shimmering, barely there. Elijah's touch on the keys was feather light, each note hanging in the air before dissolving into the next. The melody sang dreamy and distant, painting images of night and reflection and quiet beauty. In the audience, people closed their eyes, lost in the soundscape Elijah was creating. This wasn't someone going through the motions. This was artistry, real, undeniable artistry. When Claire de Lune ended, there were tears on faces throughout the hall. The applause was softer this time, more reverent, like people afraid to disturb the beauty that still lingered in the air. 2 pieces down, both successful beyond what anyone could have reasonably expected. But now came the real test. Now came silent thunder. Elijah took a breath, placed his hands on the keys, and began his own composition. The piece started with low, rumbling bass notes, the thunder of the title, deep, rolling vibrations that Elijah felt in his chest, in his bones. The rhythm was like a heartbeat, steady and insistent. Then, over that foundation, a melody emerged. Simple at first, just a few notes, but carrying such weight of emotion that it was almost unbearable. This was Elijah's voice, speaking in the only language he had left. The piece built slowly. More notes added to the melody, harmonies weaving in and out. The thunder never stopping, always there underneath the constant reminder of the storm. Then came the moment Elijah had composed on that night. Months ago, the breakthrough. The melody soared upward, reaching for something just out of grasp. The harmonies clashed and resolved, creating tension and release. The music spoke of loss and hope, of silence and sound, of finding yourself when everything you knew was taken away. Elijah's hands danced across the keyboard. He wasn't thinking anymore. He wasn't counting vibrations or worrying about technique. He was simply playing, simply sharing what lived inside him. The piece climaxed with a cascade of notes, high and low, intertwining, building to a peak that felt like breaking through into sunlight after a long darkness. And then slowly it resolved. The thunder softened. The melody came back quieter, now transformed. The piece ended with the same simple notes it had begun with, but they meant something different now. They had traveled through the storm and come out the other side. The final note hung in the air. Elijah lifted his hands from the keys. The silence that followed was different from before. This wasn't just appreciation or respect. This was something deeper. For 3 full seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. Then the hall erupted. People shot to their feet. The applause was deafening. Elijah could feel it through the stage, through the piano, through his entire body. A standing ovation that went on and on. People were crying openly. Strangers were hugging each other. In the 3rd row, Dorothy was sobbing into her hands, while Maya held her, both of them crying and laughing at the same time. In the front row, Gerald Steinberg sat with his pen still poised over his blank notepad. Slowly, he set the pen down, stood up, and began to clap. His face showed something Elijah had never expected to see there. Humility. Elijah stood and bowed his eyes, scanning the audience. He saw Mrs. Weber in the balcony, her hands clasped over her heart, tears streaming down her face, mouthing words he couldn't hear, but could feel. "I told you." The ovation continued for 5 minutes, 6, 7. Finally, Elijah bowed one last time and walked off stage. But the audience wouldn't stop. They kept applauding, calling for him to return. The stage manager looked at Elijah. "They want an encore." Elijah hadn't planned an encore, but he knew what he wanted to play. He walked back out onto the stage and sat at the piano one more time. Without announcement, without preamble, he played the piece that had started everything. The simple melody he had discovered on Maya's cheap keyboard 2.5 years ago. The first notes that had given him hope that maybe, just maybe, music wasn't lost to him forever. It was simple, unadorned, just a melody and some basic chords. But it was honest, and sometimes honesty is the most powerful thing of all. When he finished, he stood bowed one final time and left the stage. The applause followed him all the way to the green room, where he finally let himself break down. Mrs. Weber found him there crying with relief and joy and exhaustion. "You did it," she said, holding him. "You showed them. You showed everyone." But Elijah knew the truth. He hadn't played for the critics or the skeptics or even for the believers. He had played for the man he used to be, the one who thought his life was over when the silence came. He had played to prove to himself that the accident had taken his hearing, but it hadn't taken his music. The music was never in his ears. It was always in his soul. And no accident, no injury, no amount of doubt could take that away. The reviews came out the next morning. Gerald Steinberg's piece in the Chicago Tribune ran with the headline, "I was wrong. Elijah Brooks redefines what it means to be a musician." In it, Steinberg wrote, "I came to Symphony Center last night, prepared to witness a well-meaning failure. Instead, I witnessed artistry that challenged every assumption I held about music and how it's created." Elijah Brooks doesn't play piano despite being deaf. His deafness has given him access to something most of us will never understand: music in its purest, most essential form. I have been reviewing concerts for 30 years. Last night was the first time I truly understood that music is not what we hear. It's what we feel. Other critics echoed the sentiment. The performance went viral within hours. Videos captured on phones spread across social media. By the end of the week, clips of Elijah playing Silent Thunder had been viewed over 50 million times worldwide. But the numbers didn't matter to Elijah. What mattered was the messages he started receiving. A mother wrote, "My daughter is deaf. She loves music but thought she could never participate in it. After watching you, she asked for piano lessons. You gave her permission to dream." A veteran who had lost his hearing in combat wrote, "I thought my life was over. You showed me it's just beginning differently." A music teacher wrote, "I've been teaching for 20 years, and I've always focused on technical perfection. You reminded me why music exists in the first place." 3 weeks after the concert, Elijah performed at Carnegie Hall in New York. The concert sold out in 15 minutes. Major orchestras began reaching out, asking him to perform as a soloist. Record labels offered contracts. He turned most of them down. Instead, Elijah did something different. He and Mrs. Weber founded the Silent Voices Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing music education for deaf and hard-of-hearing children. They developed a curriculum based on what Elijah had learned, teaching music through vibration, through feeling, through the body's natural sense of rhythm and pattern. Within a year, they had programs in 15 cities. Within 2 years, 30. Deaf children who had never thought they could participate in music were learning piano drums, even orchestral instruments, discovering that music belonged to them too. Elijah continued to perform, but he also spent half his time teaching. He would work with young deaf students, showing them how to place their hands on the piano, how to feel the vibrations, how to trust their bodies, to know what their ears couldn't tell them. One afternoon, 2 years after his Symphony Center concert, Elijah was working with a 7-year-old deaf girl named Jasmine. She was struggling with a simple scale, frustrated, ready to give up. Elijah stopped her and placed her hand flat on the piano's side panel. Then he played a low C, letting her feel the vibration. Then a D, then an E. He showed her how each note felt different, had a different personality, told a different part of the story. "Music isn't in here," he signed to her, pointing to his ears. "It's in here," pointing to her heart, and here pointing to her hands. Jasmine tried again. This time she wasn't trying to play the notes right. She was trying to feel them. And slowly, haltingly, beautifully, she played the scale. When she finished, she looked up at Elijah with wonder in her eyes. "I felt it," she signed. "I felt the music." Elijah smiled. "Yes, you did. And you know what? That's the same way Beethoven felt it. The same way I feel it. The same way everyone who has ever truly made music has felt it." You're not different, Jasmine. You're just experiencing music the way it was always meant to be experienced, with your whole self, not just your ears. That evening, Elijah returned to his apartment in Chicago. He sat at his piano, not the cheap keyboard Maya had brought him years ago, but a beautiful Yamaha Grand that now occupied his living room. He thought about the journey, the accident, the silence, the despair, the tiny keyboard, and the first vibration he felt. Mrs. Weber's faith, the doubt, and the criticism. The night at Symphony Center. All of it had led to this moment, to this life, to this purpose. His phone buzzed. A text from Maya. "Mom wants to know if you're coming for Sunday dinner. We're making music after." Elijah smiled and typed back, "Wouldn't miss it." Because that was what it had always been about. Not the critics or the concerts or the fame. It was about the music, the connection, the proof that even in silence, even in loss, even when everything is taken away, the human spirit finds a way to sing. Elijah placed his hands on the piano keys and began to play. Not for an audience, not for a purpose, just for himself. Just for the joy of feeling the vibrations of creating something beautiful out of nothing but intention and emotion, and the language only he could speak. Outside his window, Chicago continued its evening symphony cars, honking people, talking the city's constant hum of life. Elijah couldn't hear any of it. But he didn't need to, because he had learned the most important lesson of all, that music, real music, doesn't need sound to exist. Sometimes the most powerful music is the kind you feel in your bones, in your heart, in the spaces where words and sound fall short. That was the music Elijah Brooks had discovered in the silence. And it was the music he would spend the rest of his life sharing with the world. Because in the end, we all live with our own silences, our own losses, our own moments when everything we thought defined us is taken away. And what Elijah proved was this: when you lose what you thought made you who you are, you don't lose yourself. You discover yourself. Sometimes you have to lose everything to find what was always there, waiting beneath the noise. Sometimes you have to learn to listen with more than your ears. Sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the quietest places. And sometimes, just sometimes, the silence is where the real music begins.